In this tutorial, together we will discuss the archetype profile of the trickster. Who is the trickster? The trickster is a characteristic trait that plays a two-sided game of illusion, where the superpower is deception. And this part of oneself lives by the motto, ask me no questions and I'll tell you no lies, where deceit is the name of its game. So, the trickster archetype is a secretive, calculated, cunning, crafty, vigilant, premeditative and evasive characteristic trait. The trickster is into the art of concealment to distort and deflect the truths about oneself, others, and reality. In other words, the trickster weaves delusions. It manufactures a version of reality that does not correlate with the objective facts of reality, where there is an element of psychosis. The mind is unknowingly engaging with self-deception and other deception. And let me tell you, none of us are beyond deceiving ourselves. We do it all the time. So there are three different types of trickery. Let's begin with other tricking. Other tricking means to trick others. The trickster has therefore arrived when we're telling half-truths, little white lies or whopping porkies, omitting the facts, concealing our intentions and having ulterior motives, and projecting ourselves as being more knowledgeable, skillful and capable than we really are. The trickster will deliberately give false information and exaggerate or fabricate the truth, outright denying the truth, even agreeing with someone when in fact this part of you really doesn't. Believe it or not, being deceptive has a beneficial asset. Like it or not, within all communications we are being deceptive. We are adapting and modifying our characteristics and views to suit the occasion or accommodate the person that we're communicating with. Sometimes we're not being our absolute true self. Some people will refer to this as being polite, being etiquette, biting the tongue. In certain aspects of life, we do need to keep our cards close to the chest to not rock the boat in certain situations. Especially when doing commerce, we're kind of deceiving people. We are taking on a role that presents to customers a side of us that they will buy into. We adapt our mannerisms and approach to deal with people on their terms and needs, whilst concealing other aspects of our character, especially the negative parts that would be otherwise inappropriate for the situation. And sometimes we do need to conceal the truth or not tell the whole truth to protect someone. Sometimes we need to refrain from truthful criticism and judgment to accommodate someone that is naive and still learning. Now let's look at the detrimental impact of other tricking. We can disadvantage and wrong others by shielding them from the absolute truth. We can deprive them of useful information that would otherwise promote positive change. When the trickster trait is prominent, we form relationships with people based upon the shaky foundations of duplicity. We are being duplicitous when showing the parts of self that we want them to know, whilst hiding the parts of self that we don't want them to know. Sometimes when we omit the truth or tell outright lies to other people, although they won't admit it, they do know that something's not quite right, where they start to cast doubt in their minds over our credibility and integrity, which then seeds the relationship with caution and distrust. The trickster archetype is two-faced and will outwardly agree with people whilst inwardly dismissing what they say, which means, contrary to what is spoken at the time, the trickster never really accepts, agrees, nor appreciates what others think. The trickster is always thinking of how to spin the conversation to serve his or her own selfish needs and agenda, and does this by befriending the trust of people using deceitful yet impressive narratives that elevate one's position and enhances the prospect of gaining advantage. When being someone that you are not, or even contemplating about how to deceive people, this actually elicits the trepidation of trying to be someone you are not and the anxiety of knowing that you are lying. Procrastination can also be a form of self-deception, where we are masquerading the truth of our inactivity. It is when we make promises to do something, be it gather information, make arrangements, fulfill a request, or perform a task, and yet we inform others that we are taking action, even though we aren't. Sometimes we make promises and commitments that we can't keep because we haven't got the time or competency to fulfill them. We may have good intentions to do something good, and yet we've convinced ourselves we can when actually we can't, which then leads to disappointment, distrust, and doubt from those that we've overcommitted to when we don't follow through. Not always with the malice to hurt or fool others. The trickster is often engaging with lies as a form of self-deception. We are self-deceptive to avert dealing with home truths and personal inferiorities. Self-deception is easy to recognize in others, but it's far more difficult to recognize in ourselves. It's far more difficult to call ourselves out on our own hypocrisy. The trickster will create inside the mind this alternate reality that offers comfort and protection from truths which are too hard and too painful to acknowledge and accept. Now, in certain situations, self-deception is necessary and can be life-saving. Consider a person that has experienced some type of trauma or abuse. That person will convince themselves that it's not happening and thus delude themselves from the fact that it is. The denial has become a means of survival and preservation and of making sense of what's being experienced. People experience all sorts of trauma that they can't deal with, like the end of a long-term relationship, a job redundancy, a failed business, a serious illness, or the death of a loved one. The deception is to deny the truth of what happened and repress the negative feelings. And we sometimes do this by making up a different story about the event. In this case, self-deception is a coping method so that we don't have to deal with something that we are unequipped and unprepared to deal with. Now let's discuss the detrimental impact of self-deception. When coming to delusional conclusions about a harmful and traumatic event, we can start to suffer with a kind of Stockholm syndrome and start to justify the bad actions of others. We can also convince ourselves that we've had no role to play in the bad events, mistakes, and failures that we've experienced, where we lay outward blame to the object and person. For instance, a person that has been rejected by a love interest could then convince himself that she rejected him because she did not share in his ideals of happiness. Even a woman that has been raped by someone could have avoided that situation had she not chose to put herself in a vulnerable position of walking through a park in the early hours of a weekend morning whilst drunk. Not being able to confront the cold truths of our life experiences means that these become insecure, unacceptable, and shameful aspects of our character, the dark shadows that we carry within. This means that there will always be a sense of disingenuousness and a conflict of character between who we project outwards and who we conceal inwards. This elicits self-doubt and a power struggle between two parts of the self, which leads to inconsistent and unstable behaviours. When being dishonest with how we truly think and feel, we often agree with people that we would otherwise disagree with and make choices that compromise who we are and what we can actually do. Inevitably, this leads to negative consequences. In today's thinkers' world, people are deceiving themselves by intellectualizing life whilst repressing their deeper intelligence. This means they are relying too much on external information whilst disconnected from intuition. They think about the problems and solutions of life in cold and abstract terms, whilst repressing the intuitive feelings that signal something could be wrong and immoral. Most self-deceptions are to sustain the principles and beliefs of our self-identity. We are always looking to maintain a sense of self that we can feel content and righteous to live with. It is when something happens and the ugly facts of reality threatens the good image and convictions of the person and the life that we identify with that we experience a confirmation bias. We dismiss certain facts that are incompatible with our perception and self-identity. We twist the truth. We focus on and maximize what affirms our identity, defocus and minimalize that which contests our self-identity. Therefore, the truth as we see it is highly selective. Denial does play a huge part of self-deception. For example, we could be attracted to someone and refuse to admit that we are. We could have this embarrassing aspect of our character that we feel is too shameful and inappropriate to reveal, and so we deny this part and often start doing things opposed to that trait to find some distance from it. And the more we deny, the more we live a lie, and the more it tears us apart inside. We lie to ourselves about things that we can't control or change. We've convinced ourselves that we can control or change it because we want to feel empowered and helpful, and yet we deny that we are indeed powerless to have any influence over the situation. This inability to acknowledge and accept that we are powerless will always be met with the pains of thinking that we have power when we don't. So let's summarize the profile of the trickster archetype. Within a world that is rife with fake people and undisclosed agendas, it is a beneficial skill to detect fraudulent interactions and scams. Being a master of deception, therefore, the trickster archetype is good at spotting the falseness of situations and the deceitful intentions of other people, because it takes one to know one. On the flip side of this, when struggling to recognize and accept the facts of reality, the Trickster is prone to false indoctrinations and propaganda. Without further investigation, the trickster will form staunch beliefs that have no verified basis in factual reality. Unfortunately, the trickster can steep so deep into deceptive behaviour that one becomes distorted from the actual truth about self and others, believing in the spin that's being spun. The fictional mindset of the trickster makes this trait an autocrat for baseless assumptions and unverified conclusions. When operating with just the false accounts of reality, one is deluded and detached from what is right and wrong, which makes the trickster error prone, where erroneous judgments lead to reoccurring mistakes and failures. Erroneous judgments stem from a lack of wisdom. Wisdom can only be learned from truthful experiences, not by pulling the wool over one's eyes and believing that things are better, worse, or different than they actually are. We deceive ourselves from actual reality by ignoring the uncomfortable truths and continuing to live with the comfortable lies. Deception, however, does require the huge effort of juggling illusory fabrications. To keep a false story alive, the trickster must continually act with feigned behaviour, and it is laborious work trying to be someone that you are not. That which does not come natural does become a hard chore. Eventually, the trickster will drop a ball or two and reveal its devious intentions. Those savvy enough to see through the veil, they leave before it's too late. And those who don't know that they're being tricked by the trickster will see the error as a forgivable mistake, which only keeps the magic trick going. Whenever the objective facts of reality threaten to compromise the trickster's narrative, either a new narrative is weaved or there is outright dismissal or denial of those facts. The trickster is an artful dodger of the indisputable truth, which often means avoiding people and situations that requires vulnerability, honesty, and openness. The trickster often triggers the escape artist as we run away from the truths that we cannot handle. The problem is, without confronting the truths of self, we can never resolve who we are. The trickster does stand in the way of self-development, which needs unadulterated truth. Truth is easy, simple, reality-based, foundational, and self-standing. With truth, we can build strength, authenticity, and integrity of character. Anything less than the truth is to manifest a delusional experience, whereby we expand our perspective into this bubble of delusion. Bubbles do require a lot of effort to keep inflated and stay afloat within. Bubbles often burst and with shocking effect. So take the time to restudy this profile and contemplate where the trickster shows up in your life. Then move on to the archetypal profile of the imposter.